Welcome back. I hope you did well on your Chapter 5 test. Today we're going to start learning about ancient China. In this chapter, we'll talk about their artistry, their scholarship, their inventions. You see, the ancient Chinese worked, studied, and thought. Even though the Chinese shut themselves off from other civilizations, they did a pretty good job of making progress on their own. See, they didn't have any influences or contact with other cultures. We'll also look at the different Chinese dynasties, from the Shang to the Han, and talk about the contributions of each. But first, let's take a quick look at this chapter's chapter organizer. It's called a fishbone organizer. As we talk about the Shang Dynasty in the next few lessons, just make sure that you fill in all of the blanks. You'll also notice that the page numbers are listed beside each of the major headings. That'll help you find the right answers. Okay, back to ancient China. First of all, let's look at the geography of the country. Take a few minutes and read pages 142 and 143 and think about these questions. What were China's natural boundaries? Why did the early Chinese call their land the Middle Kingdom? China was isolated for 1,000 years from the rest of the world by mountains, jungles, a desert, and an ocean. These natural boundaries protected the Chinese people from foreign invaders. Even though they were isolated from other civilizations, China's culture flourished. Strangely enough, they were an advanced people. Understand, usually civilizations borrowed from one another to improve. A little from this civilization, a little from that civilization, and you have progress. But not so with the Chinese. They actually had more skills than many other people groups from their day. The early Chinese that migrated to Eastern Asia settled near the rivers. The rivers were similar to the Nile in that they would flood and leave fertile silt behind, making the land good for farming. They called their land the Middle Kingdom because they thought it was in the center of the earth. They didn't know any better because they hadn't seen anyone else.
China is home to some of the most famous tourist destinations on the planet. The Great Wall, the Forbidden City, the Terracotta Army. Many of these sites are huge, but perhaps more impressive than their size is their age. The Terracotta Army was buried for thousands of years until some farmers discovered pieces of these statues in 1974. The entire area is now a museum. China is so vast and contains so much variety that sometimes people have a hard time wrapping their head around it. A comparison with the US might be helpful. The two countries are almost the same size. The two countries have similar climates, but China has a lot more people. A lot more people. And a lot more neighbors. And a lot more history. But for most of its history, the region hasn't changed much. For thousands of years, most of the people have lived either along the east coast or along the two major rivers, the Huanghe and the Yangtze. Most of the people were farmers. And farms need water. During the past few decades, though, millions have been leaving their farms and moving to the cities. Those cities are also along the east coast and major rivers. Factories need water just as much as farms. The whole world is watching China right now. The enormous population gives China a tremendous advantage, but China's greatest asset is also its biggest challenge. The population is using up so much water and natural resources that the Gobi and Guguchi deserts are growing. In fact, they're growing so quickly that they threaten to swallow up China's capital city, Beijing. During the last few years, China has been constructing the Green Wall of China. planting new forests along the edge of the desert to make the land useful again. Only time will show if this project will succeed at slowing the deserts and stopping the dust storms.
China was ruled by several dynasties, 24 to be exact. One of the first dynasties was the Shang Dynasty. Well, at least one of the first to make a difference. Take a few minutes and read pages 144 and 145 and think about these questions. Why was the Huang Ha often called China's sorrow? What effect did the Shang believe their ancestors had on the weather? The Shang Dynasty started ruling about 1500 BC. They settled along the Huang Ha, or Yellow River, in northern China. Most of the common people during the Shang Dynasty were simple farmers. They grew vegetables and different grains, especially rice. Most of the food was grown to feed themselves. Their lot was hard because the Huang Ha was an unpredictable river. It was called China's sorrow because it often flooded and killed thousands of people and ruined their harvests. When the harvests were destroyed, famine would inevitably follow because of the lack of food. The Shang practiced a religion that involved ancestor worship. Ancestor worship is basically worshiping the spirits of dead relatives. You see, the Chinese believed that the spirits of their departed ancestors lived on in the afterworld. The ancestors had magical powers that allowed them to punish or help the Shang people. Let me give you an example. When the weather was good, the Shang believed that their ancestors were pleased. If there was a drought or famine, the Shang believed that their ancestors were angry with them for something that they did. Obviously, the Shang wanted to keep their ancestors happy. Remember, the Egyptians believed the same type of thing. They believed that the pharaohs would help them after they died by helping with the crops. Except the Shang believed that their ancestors controlled the weather, not the pharaoh. So, to please their ancestors, the Chinese used tings. A ting was an ornate bronze vessel used to cook meat for a sacrifice. The royal families had special ceremonies for preparing and serving their sacrifices. Now let me clarify. In addition to ancestors, the Shang also worshipped a supreme god who was over many lesser gods. That made them polytheistic. They were extremely superstitious. They used oracle bones, which were animal bones or turtle shells used to predict the future. You see, an oracle was believed to be a great source of wise statements or predictions. They also thought that the gods spoke through the oracle. You see, the king had a priest write a question on the oracle bone, and then the priest would heat up the bone until it cracked. The cracks were supposed to be the answers from the ancestors or the gods. Of course, the priests interpreted the cracks however he wanted, and then reported the answer to the king. The king would base all of his decisions from when to begin planting to whether to go to war on the priest's interpretation. Obviously, this system gave the priests a ton of power. Besides the office of priest, many of them also were governmental officials. The priests could pretty much say what they wanted and get the king to do whatever they wanted him to do. A lot of the Chinese people still believe that their ancestors influenced the events of their everyday lives. Many of the people still perform the correct rites to give their ancestors the proper afterlife. But these rites or duties make it very difficult for many Chinese to become Christians. Understand, a person who becomes a Christian won't offer sacrifices to his ancestors. That person endures a great deal of persecution because he is not honoring the family. The Bible does teach that children should honor their parents, but Jesus said in Luke 14:26 that honoring parents cannot be placed above honoring God. Okay, it's time for dig and drill. Why did the Chinese name their land the Middle Kingdom? Because they thought it was in the center of the earth. Why is the Huanghe, or Yellow River, sometimes called China's sorrow? Because of the river's flooding, people were killed and many harvests were ruined. Next time, we will continue learning about the Shang Dynasty. Until then, have a great day.